Donald Trump is a criminal who was found guilty of 34 felony counts of fraud, liable for sexual abuse. Of course he's lying and abusing and manipulating the stock market too. When he talks about rapists and criminals, he should look in the mirror.
Mic drop. Look in the mirror. When he talks about rapists and criminals, mic drop on that. Right?
Yeah,
what are we talking about here?
Listen, I have to tell you, this was fantastic. And listening to AOC and listening to Bernie Sanders was pretty amazing. And I'll tell you what it reminds me of. There was an article some weeks ago that said democracy dies in decorum. And I think that's exactly it. So if you go back to the moment of Congressman Al Green and how people were just uplifted about the fact of how he was standing up, this is what Congresswoman AOC looks like to me. This is what Senator Bernie Sanders looks like to me, that they are standing up and they are really, what I like to say is they have stopped whispering and they are speaking loud and louder about what's happening, what the American people need to hear. So I love that.
I did too. And I think what's really important for everybody in this room to acknowledge and do is we have to say it, to claim it, right? We're talking about reclaiming democracy. We have to name what's going on. We can't say, like the Trump administration. No, your government. We have to use words that sort of say what's happening. Fascism, a regime. These are important words. So when we say to people, like I was listening to C-SPAN, we're going to talk today about what happened with Kilmer Abrego Garcia, and that when Senator Chris Van Hollen went down to El Salvador, that's also speaking loudly and keeping that pressure on to bring this man home. But I noticed on C-SPAN, they kept using the word deportation. And we always do deportation. That's normal stuff. That's not what happened.
Right. Right.
We need to use the word when we say, like we talked in the green room about, we were talking about George Floyd when he was murdered by police with, the boot neck. That we need to call it out. And these are the things we can't forget. Those injustices can't be just forgotten and move on, because that's why we're still here today, is we didn't address that.
Yeah, so let me just take a minute and say very clearly what I think about that. So Senator Van Hollen, of course, goes to El Salvador. It's really interesting. The words that he uses is, I went there for a very simple humanitarian request. Yeah. It's very simple what he was asking for. And what we found on the right is that they used every opportunity to bring the attention away from that. So what they said is, oh, he's there. He's not focused on a woman that was brutally murdered, which we all care about. But they changed the conversation immediately to that. And what I want to change it to is, I didn't hear the Republicans trying to, make every single police officer accountable for the time that a police officer put his knee on the neck of a man until he died. But I don't hear them castrating every single police officer, but we want to do that to our immigrant population. Yes. So I think that we have an opportunity to use their hypocrisy against them. It is their superpower, and we have to start making sure that we are the kryptonite to remind them of the things that they have done and said.
You could already see it happening. They're trying to pivot and say, oh, Democrats care about rapists and murderers and terrorists. And, this is the label, the words they use to dehumanize people right away. So we can't fall into that trap. They try to lead us down that trap, and really pivot. This is really, when you call law breaking, corruption, and even tying in the economy, gaming it. And AOC, I think, did a brilliant job with Bernie on this tour, this oligarchy tour. This is really educating and going across the country doing this. So it's so important. And before we move on to introduce our guests, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about what was on your mind with the governor's race. Items of housekeeping, as we say, before we talk about.
Yeah. Well, of course, we know the governor's race is heating up. There's a lot of money being raised. And this is, of course, Virginia, I'm talking about. Virginia and New Jersey, the few places that have a race in 2025. And it is so critically important. And one of the things that we'll have a chance to talk about today is how important that it will be to focus on the governor's race, but also on those 100 seats. And last night I had the opportunity to go to a fundraiser for Lindley Thorne and for Rural Ground Game. And we talked about the impact that rural will have on this race and how important it will be for us to make sure that we put the effort into rural, that we know that only 3% typically goes into rural races, and especially races that people don't think you can win. But we
Right.
have to really be focused on the margins in this race. And so I know we'll have an opportunity to put information in about billboards in rural spaces, but it's going to be just as important to focus on races that we think we can't win, because sometimes winning the race is not as important when you can't as moving the margins. And so that's what I
Yeah.
will say about last night.
Well, exactly. In this room too, we're doing what's happening, our work under this kind of attack on our country and fascism, and then try to fight in the ground, on the ground, in the grassroots about this election in Virginia. Good thing we're multitaskers. You know what I'm saying? This
Yeah.
is where our superpower is. We're just not singularly focused. So with that, I'd like to get to the show today, because I really think, talk about oligarchy. We talk about, look, you can't do this crazy batshit plan without shutting down voting, people. So we're glad you're in the room today. Today, you're on Network Nova Live. It's April 18th, 2025, and we're so glad you're in the room. Donnell Norton, Catherine White are your co-hosts today. Yay, we're getting it done, making politics fun. And rules of the road, we do a little show business, is that use the chat right now. Tell us what you're doing, where it's at, what's on your mind, what's concerning you, share in there. But if you get nasty, we'll boot your butt out. And also, after chat, 1 p.m., we turn things down, turn things off, but we get to light you up, and you get to ask your questions to the guests. And I know that Anthony Flaccavento plans to be here to talk more about the rural, how we're broadening the rural resistance. So we want to make sure people stay in budget, get a big sandwich, okay? So you can last. And our patrons, thank you so much. Love to see more in our cup. We're really doing great, but we need to step up our fundraising and ask to support us, because we want to do so much with it. Thank you to our latest backer, Donna Tolliver. If you're in the room, kisses to you and all of our backers, believers. We love you, and our badasses. Thank you for believing in us. And reminder, follow us on Substack. Watch our YouTube stuff. I put some good stuff on there. I want more views. Thank you very much. So today we were talking about reclaiming democracy, broadening the resistance. And we're so excited because we did good timing. And with the SAVE Act, or we call it the Slave Act, we have Aaron Mukerjee, Associate Elias Group here today, talking about the impacts of the Trump's EOCs and the SAVE Act on our democracy and what we can do now. Very exciting. Next guest, we talk about lawyers on guard. When you just say that, and I think about our democracy, we have a badass in the room, Cory Amron. She's the president of the Women's Lawyer on Guard. And what a storied background she has, and just in these wonderful women really holding up our legal justice system and their history of protecting women's equality and other issues. But we're going to talk to her about what they're doing to broaden and strengthen the democratic institutions and participation in those. And then lastly, haven't had him on in a while, but we're back. We got to include rural in this resistance. Anthony Flaccavento. We met him when he ran back in 2018 for the Congressional District in Virginia 9. He's co-founder and executive director at the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, RUBI. We're going to talk about what's going on in rural. We're talking, what's that look like? We're talking about broadening the resistance to include the working class and the people in those areas, and make sure that democracy is delivering for those folks as well. All right, so first up, and for now, you're going to stick with me
I'm
because
going to stick with you.
Very excited, and I feel like we're going to go a little long today. So buckle up, everybody. Aaron Mukerjee, get in the room, bring him up. Elias Law Firm, and I'm going to say, you're the most kindest, generous person. Can I just say that? You've been
Thank
so
you.
generous with your time. We've been calling you in a panic. What does this mean for married women, the SAVE Act? But you're a graduate of Harvard Law School, and you got your BA from Harvard College. And back in 2023, you served as the voter protection director for the Democratic Party of Virginia. And so that's really where we talked last time, really with the little bad stuff they were doing in Virginia, Governor Youngkin purging voters and all that. And it was really a great story. So now here we are with this weight of the SAVE Act. So let's start there.
Hey,
And
Catherine,
What? Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, before you start there, I just want to say, as a graduate of Harvard, thank you. And aren't you really proud about your university standing up to the
I
Trump
am
administration?
proud to
So,
be at.
Aaron, I just wanted to say kudos to you and your university because that is going to open the way for a whole lot of other universities to feel like they don't have to capitulate to what this president is doing. So I wanted to say that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I agree with that. And I think that's actually interesting to start with because when people stand together, then it's easier to really fight against an autocracy. But as soon as someone's folds, it makes whoop. So thank you for Cory Amron, also from Harvard University, just so you know. All right. So Aaron, what do you say? What the heck? What's going on in your mind? Where are we going with the SAVE Act? And give us the background on it and what we should really be looking for right now.
Well, so look, this is great timing, and it actually builds on the conversation we had last year about the Youngkin purges. I think these two things are related, right? There's been this narrative about that is trying to tie immigration in with voting, right? That says non-citizens are voting in our elections in a widespread way that is changing the results of the election, and that has been ongoing on the right since 2020. And the Youngkin purges were in a response to that narrative. We know last year they purged citizens from the rolls, even though they were purportedly trying to purge non-citizens. So what they're doing with these executive orders and with the SAVE Act is taking that to the national stage. They are trying to require a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. And in doing so, creating all sorts of other problems, as you mentioned, for people who don't have the documents that they need to show. So, what the SAVE Act and what the executive order do is try to get people who are registering to vote or just updating their registration, which is a huge percentage of the people who register every year. Many of them are already on the rolls; they just moved addresses. But it's getting everyone who's doing any sort of voter registration transaction is going to have to show what they call documentary proof of citizenship. And that means, in most cases, a passport, a birth certificate. If you change your name, you've got to then show a chain of custody of how, your marriage certificate as well to be able to show that you're the same person with the birth certificate. And I don't know about you all. I don't know where my birth certificate currently is. And 50% of Americans don't have a passport. And so this is a huge problem, not by the way, just for Democrats, for Republicans, for independents, for anybody trying to register to vote. And it's all in response to a problem that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I do have a question, Aaron. One of the things that I keep on seeing is people keep thinking that the real ID is something that they can use as a substitute. So can you just talk a little bit about what people actually must use if the Slave Act should pass?
So this goes to the way this act is written, which is poorly. And one of the things they say is you can show a real ID that proves U.S. citizenship. There are only 5 states that offer what's called an enhanced driver's license that actually distinguishes between that says, okay, if you get this ID, this proves you're a citizen. The real ID is issued if you're a legal permanent resident or if you're a U.S. citizen. And so there's no way in the other 45 states for the real ID to show that you are in fact a U.S. citizen, which means that for the vast, vast majority of people, they're not going to be able to use that form of ID, and they're going to have to then use a passport, a birth certificate, a naturalization certificate. There's a list of a few things, again, most of which people don't have ready access to when they're trying to go register to vote.
Mhm. So what do you think right now when you're watching this in the Elias Group? What is their position on the likelihood this will pass the Senate?
Look, I'm hopeful that it won't, and I think that relies on folks like you and all the folks all over the country to put pressure on senators, Democratic senators, and the few Republican senators who are on the fence on this to try to stop this from happening. I've been pleased to see that most of the battleground Senate candidates and senators have opposed it. But we ought to start putting pressure on the Republicans as well. If they try to eliminate the filibuster to get this through, we've got to be ready for that. So I'm hopeful that this is going to be dead in the Senate. I think that reasonable people, if we have any of those left in on the Republican side in the Senate, understand that this is a serious threat to democracy.
Well, like Fidel and I were really bothered for Democrats voted for it in the House. So then it kind of gives permission to some things in the Senate to happen when you're not calling out the kind of voter suppression tool it is, right, Fidel?
Yeah, I guess I sometimes wonder if I'm living in bizarro world because it just feels so nonsensical that anyone would think that this is okay. And when the four Democrats in the House voted for it, and their reasons was, well, we think that only Americans should be voting. Well, we all believe that, and that's why there are laws already in place to prevent that from happening. So I guess I'm just because it would just disenfranchise so many people, I'm just finding it hard for any reason that any Democrat would vote for this. And I find it hard for even what is the reason for Republicans? Because they're going to disenfranchise their own people. Is there an end game that we're just not thinking about for
Yeah, it's a good question.
legislation?
Yeah, and I'll just speak for myself and not for the firm or for
Sure.
our clients. But look, I think the end game is chaos, right? They are trying to make our elections unworkable. They are trying to put so much pressure on the system, which they've been trying to do for years, but they now have the opportunity to actually do this. They're trying to put so much pressure on the system that it becomes impossible to run a free and fair election. I'll give you an example. As part of this legislation, a lot of us focus on the documentary proof of citizenship piece. But the other thing it does is it allows any private actor, anybody, any individual, to sue an election official who they believe has registered somebody who didn't show documentary proof of citizenship. They can, that is going to lead to a slew of litigation against election officials if this passes. That's going to make it impossible for them to do their jobs. So I think at a broader level, the goal of this is to undermine the entire system. And we saw that with the executive order too. And we've seen it obviously with everything the Trump administration has been doing over the last 3 months.
So then, if this, let's just say that it passed the Senate and they did something with the filibuster and it happened, then would it be an opportunity for it to go to the Supreme Court? What would be next?
Yeah, what's that look
I
like?
think I think there would certainly be litigation over the same way there's been litigation over the executive orders. Whoever brings it, we don't know, but this is going to be challenged in some form. Look, the Supreme Court has said in the past that under current federal law, documentary proof of citizenship is not required to vote in federal elections. The question now is going to become, are there constitutional constraints on the ability of Congress to pass something like this? I think there are. Whether the Supreme Court ultimately agrees with that is, as we know, unknown, right? So I think the best thing we can do, the only thing we can do right now is make sure this doesn't pass the Senate. And we've got to put pressure on the folks who are on the fence on this, because I mean, just to, put this in the broader context of the voting rights movement, this would be the first time that Congress would pass a federal law restricting the right to vote in our history. Every time we've
Right.
advanced on voting rights, it has been states that are trying to restrict the access to the ballot, and it's been the federal government had to step in and say, under the Voting Rights Act, under the Help America Vote Act, under the NVRA, the National Voter Registration Act, in all these contexts, we're going to help people vote. This would be the first time. It would be a symbolic defeat, I think, for our democracy if this were to pass, because it would be the first time in our country's history that we would have federal legislation restricting the right to vote.
But the Trump's executive orders that seems like to be two sizes. You have this legislation, and then you have the executive orders with all this, like get new voting booths and all this stuff. And I know there's a lot of a lot of attorney generals signing on to the lawsuits and different people. Where is that at now? And how do you see this both working together? And in my mind, I'm also concentrating on Virginia, right? And so I want to get to that before I let you leave today, because we need to get ready. So how does this all going to work together, and how do we prepare?
Yeah, so there was a hearing yesterday in the DC District Court on the executive order that Trump signed on what you mentioned, documentary proof of citizenship for people using a federal voter registration form, and then a number of other things around paper ballots and machines and all of that. that, I'm hopeful that the judge will issue an injunction against that executive order. It's clearly unconstitutional. It violates the separation of powers. It violates federal law. Again, we're going to see how that works its way through the courts. Again, I feel good about it, but we'll see how that ultimately turns out. But I think, their backup, right, is the SAVE Act. Their backup, their expansion, whatever you want to call it, is the SAVE Act. Because the courts have already ruled, like I said, the courts have already ruled that in federal elections under the National Voter Registration Act, you don't have to show documentary proof of citizenship. And so the SAVE Act is their way to change that federal law to try to get this done. And I'm happy we can talk a little bit about what that means in Virginia. Look, all of this only applies to federal elections, right? That's the theory. And the federal government can only control federal elections. And so in Virginia in 2025, where we're voting for governor and attorney general and House of Delegates, none of this should apply. The question is going to be, how does that actually work in practice? To my earlier point of trying to make the election system unworkable, will you have to have a separate voter roll system for voters who are registered to vote in Virginia, where there is no documentary proof of citizenship requirement, and then a separate voting rolls for federal voters, what they call, who have shown documentary proof of citizenship. Arizona has, for many years, had essentially the inverse of this system. They have a state level documentary proof of citizenship requirement. And the Supreme Court ruled in 2013 that they could not require documentary proof of citizenship to vote in federal elections. And so they have this group of what they call federal only voters who have not been able to procure, for whatever reason, that proof that they need and haven't been able to show that. And so they have about 200,000 of these voters who are on the rolls. They maintain these two separate voter rolls. Is every state going to have to do that under this legislation? So again, it would make things incredibly difficult for election officials. It would put a ton of pressure on them and on the system. And I think that is ultimately the goal that we're trying to achieve.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for being here. And I don't know if you could stick around, but if you can, there may be some questions in the chat, because I know that we'll be circling back as we sort of game out how to prepare, especially like you said, it's like looking at Social Security, how they were happy to close offices. What we know about this bill would be change how we register to vote. No mail-in, no online. And so it is a big change. So appreciate you being here. Yeah, go ahead.
Of course. And the one thing I'll say about it, just in Virginia in 2025 for voters, nothing has changed yet, right? So as we're talking to voters, we ought to be clear. You can vote the same way you've always voted. Go to the polls, turn out this November. Don't be nervous about it, because nothing has actually changed yet, and we'll let you know if it does.
Yeah, not to get the panic on. All right. Well, thank you, Aaron. Let's dance out. Yes, so we need to we're a little behind, so I want to jump over and come back with you in a bit. You can get all energized and ready. I know everybody is really all over that SAVE Act in here, and we talk about the law and the protections of it and how it's functioned throughout history to really guard our democracy. I'm excited to have in the room Cory Amron. She's the president of American Women Lawyers on Guard. We had such a good discussion, the great work that you've done over your storied life, really. When we met to talk about, you were the second chair to Hillary Rodham Clinton of the Commission on Women at the American Bar Association. So very exciting. You're the head, or the former head of the IP practice group at the Voorhees Law Firm.
Yes, that's right.
Yep. Graduate of that Harvard Law School. How proud of you must be today as well. And a storied 40-year legal career. I'm so glad to have you in the room. Welcome. What do you think?
Thank you.
Energized and pumped up now?
I am. I'm going to play that video every morning. Okay. Yeah. First of all, I really want to thank Aaron and his firm for the incredible work that they are doing. And I want to thank Anthony in advance for the amazing work that his organization is doing. And thank you, Catherine, and all the people at the Power Lunch really for bringing our voices together. But I also want to thank our audience because they are here with active listening ears. And what I mean by that is they're listening to what we have to say, but we're going to be challenging them. They need to take action. So, and before I start talking about what I wanted to say, to Aaron's point about a problem in search, no problem in search of a solution. With a different hat on, I did a lot of canvassing and knocking on doors in various states. Sometimes we were trying to register people to vote, and there were many, many people. When I knocked on the door, they said, I'm sorry, I'm not a citizen, I can't vote. There was absolutely nobody who registered to vote because they were not a citizen and they were trying to vote. So this is just not a problem, and it's absolutely ridiculous. But in any event.
But that seems to be where we are, because I think what we are learning is the power of language to define things, right? So, I mean, this is where we are today. And I'm excited to let the audience know about what Women Lawyers on Guard is. It's nonpartisan. If you want to give the background of how this organization came about, that would be awesome.
Well, 2 seconds. We started at the very end of 2016, and we're a group of mostly women, mostly lawyers around the country, decided that we needed to do something to save our all the progress that we had made up till that point. And we've been working in 3 areas over the past 8 years. Basically, sexual harassment, particularly the legal profession, women's reproductive rights, and gender and workplace equity. And the thing I wanted to talk about today is that in the last 3 years, we've been working on what we call a Project Democracy. Because we realized that when we were doing our work, we submitted an amicus brief in the Dobbs case on behalf of women legal organizations around the country. And we realized in seeing the trajectory of what was happening with the anti-democratic forces is that it was all the same people and all the same money as there are behind the anti-democracy forces. So the anti-abortion forces, I should say, and the anti-democracy forces are basically one. And looking at the trajectory over 40 plus more years, realizing that they have a very long-term plan, always have had a very long-term plan. And we started thinking, well, okay, so if they have this very long-term plan, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, for trying to destroy our democracy, who is out there that's trying to save our democracy, build our democracy, better our democracy? And that started us on basically a 2+ year journey of interviewing and talking to many, many, many organizations to try to see what's out there. Is anybody doing this?
And
well,
what did you find? I love it. I love it.
Okay, yeah, tune in tomorrow. No, so the way I kind of look at this is it's kind of like a tug of war. I don't know if anybody, if you, Catherine, or anybody out there when you were a child would play tug of war. I know most people, I think, don't get outside to play games anymore. But in any event, you can imagine this big, really thick rope and teams on either side, and they're holding onto that rope and pulling, okay, one against the other. And that rope is really thick, so theoretically it's not breaking. But if you look at, again, the anti-democratic forces, or even the anti-abortion forces, you'll see that rope has gone a little bit forward this way, back this way, a little bit forward this way, a little bit back this way. And we're now seeing that we are, there was this line in the sand where the teams, were were to cross and they would win. We are seeing this back and forth, and we're almost over that line. So and not to mention the fact that I think the rope is almost breaking. But so it became clear as we talked to each of these organizations, and again, this is long before people heard of Project 2025,
Right.
that as we on the pro-democracy side, I don't look at this as a partisan thing, the pro-democracy side are very much siloed. So there's lots of money going into various organizations who are doing amazing work. They are just they could be knocking it out of the park. But there's also no, what we call sort of an overarching sort of umbrella-like plan to say, okay, these organizations are here doing this, these organizations here doing this. Well, what about this? What about this idea?
Right.
So it was really clear from these conversations that a couple of things. One is we're not going to be able to coordinate people, okay? The people on the anti-democratic forces side, they do a great job of coordinating. They pool huge billions of dollars into organizations that have large staffs. You know, there's the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society and all of those. And so they are able to move in a very cohesive, coherent way, even if they're, you know, moving back and forth like this.
Right.
But on the pro-democracy side, there's lots of silos, as I said. And so there's not the same kind of coordination or global vision, should I say.
Right.
And one of the things we also talked about was, what does it mean? What does a democracy even mean? What are we talking about when we
Right.
say democracy? A lot of people think, oh, that means voting. That means registering to vote. That means the rule of law. It means the judiciary and the legal profession. Well, this is only a part of what we mean by democracy. And I think that, you know, Aaron understands that it is voting and rule of law and all these things. But I think that Anthony would probably say it's so much more. It's economic opportunity. It's education. It's civility. It's nonviolence. And one of the things that I think undergirds all of this is factual information. And the
Mhm.
fragmentation of our media systems and the media deserts that we have just destroyed our base of factual information. So, as I said, we started talking to people, talking, gathering information. We have a list of organizations that people would mention that we taught, also people, you know, those that we talked with. It's 30 pages long.
Wow.
Organizations, and we haven't even touched the surface. And each of these organizations would say, again, this umbrella idea, which I'll go to in a second, this is a great idea. We're not doing it, but maybe you can go talk to this other organization. We'll give you the names of those people, and we would contact them. That's how we went from one to another. So again, the idea is not to force people to do anything. It's really not even to collaborate. It's not even to make sure that everyone's on the same page. What it is, taking into account how the pro-democracy forces work, is to gather information from organizations, from academicians, from what I call audacious thinkers, creative thinkers. Because if
Right.
there's nothing you can say positive about the anti-democracy forces, they have audacious thinkers.
They do have big to take it away.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. And so to gather all this information and to come up with a plan that contains the betterment of democracy, not just trying to make it, you know, our thought was democracy in 40 years. Probably should have said democracy in 40 days, but
Exactly.
so we thought, okay, we'll gather all these ideas, get them down in terms of a plan with goals and action items and et cetera. And then again, not force anybody to do anything, but map this plan to what people are doing and determine, okay, so there's all these people doing this and there's this, but then do a gap analysis. Okay, well, what about this idea? This is really interesting. Can we push that out? Can we push that to people who are funding democracy? There's lots and lots of organizations that are funding democratic initiatives.
Right.
And then again, not force anyone to do anything, but just push these ideas out and look at assessing how is it going? You know, are we working towards?
You like think of it as being a doctor taking like the patient's, you know, what do you call it? Like their pulse, their where they're at, their health. Are you assessing really the health of our society, our country in a way? Like you're kind of seeing what's there and then mapping out that and then trying to see what the cure is in a way, or what could be possibly the remedy of what's going on?
Well, certainly making it better.
Certainly
Making
better,
it more
right.
healthy, making it
Healthy
serve
democracy.
more people. I mean, I really like to talk to Anthony about what he's doing. I mean, trying to make it, again, this is not a partisan issue, but make it better life for people. Why is it that they were sucked into this, all this, people call it disinformation. I call it propaganda. Why
That's the
are
word we need
people,
to call it. Yes.
let's use our words, right? Let's use those words.
Yes. Well, in the wrap up, because I know I hope you can stay with us if you have a few minutes in the after chat. But in the sense of, I know you had talked also the resources maybe you're building in this moment too. I mean, you're working on this project that has almost an emergency around it. You know, do we have like years to sort of sit on and talk about it? No, I think you're actually doing a lot. If people go to the website, there's a lot of action and events you're taking as well around democracy. Also signing on to make us brief, like you said. But in the sense of, you know, working on this democracy initiative, here comes Fanel, great. You know, where the pathway where you're going to help maybe federal workers, maybe as along the way, we'll have some resources around happening to the law firms and the federal workers, and we'll wrap with that.
We have a page on our website called Issues that and if people would join our network, we're sending out information about helping federal workers. There was just a resource center that opened up where they can get pro bono help, advice. We're sending out ideas for volunteers, particularly lawyers, not exclusively lawyers. We're sending out curated information about rallies and protests and things like that. There's one on May 1st. Please go to the Supreme Court. Yep.
Put that link. We'll put that link in there, but I know we need to wrap. I hope you can stay with it and listen to, go ahead.
I just want to say one last thing, and that is that Rachel Cohn said, courage is a choice. Robert Hubble said, courage is contagious. And I say that courage is a team sport. Right?
Hold on to that rope.
Okay.
Don't
so everybody needs to take some action. Thank you.
I like that. Yeah, go for now.
I really do hope that Cory can stay in the after chat. There is so much more that I want to talk about, and I love her audacious thinkers. And we talk about democracy all the time, and we would always say democracy is more than a word, that it is how you dance, how you move, how you think, how you choose. It is just the way that you get to live into the world. But I love your civility and nonviolent and truth. And I think that we just have not had an opportunity to really talk to people in a really big way about this thing and why and how it matters. And that is a nonpartisan issue. So I love that.
True. Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Cory. Thank you for being here. And I'll hand it over to you, my friend, to welcome. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I am really excited to bring on the co-founder and executive director of the Rural Urban Bridge Initiative, Anthony Flaccavento. So we're going to have an opportunity today to chat a little bit about rural and how it's so important. And the way that we do that is the title that we gave it, Broadening the Resistance, which means that we need to expand the way that we think about this. So Anthony, I know you have some slides. I'm going to need you to do them in dog years. There's a couple of things that I'll come back to, but I think that your presentation on why this is so important, I'm going to let you run with that for a few minutes.
Thank you so much, Fanal. I'm really glad to be here, very privileged to be here with my colleagues, with Aaron and Cory. I graduated from the University of Kentucky, which we like to think of as the Harvard of Appalachia. But anyway, really privileged to be here with all of you. And so I'm going to bring up a slide presentation. I violated all of the rules
Yes,
of
you did.
the Friday. I've not only have slides, but I have 4 times as many as I was asked to limit it to. So can you see them?
Yes, we can.
Okay, we're going to rock and roll really fast. I'm talking about the need and the how of broadening the resistance, not only to beat Trump in the long run, but to win in the short term. So many of you know this kind of infamous quote from Chuck Schumer: for every blue-collar Democrat we lose in Western Pennsylvania, we'll pick up 2 moderate Republicans in the suburbs in Philadelphia. Well, what happens when the party of the working class dismisses the working class? Well, this is what we get. This is the map. Every one of those red arrows indicates a movement towards Trump in the most recent election. And the startling thing is that the movement towards him was not just in all those red states, but in every single blue state except Washington state. So when there's so much involved in the why of what's happened, and we're going to only touch on it briefly. Race and racism is absolutely part of it. But when we focus too much, too exclusively on the racist white dudes who are certainly there as part of Trump's base, we overlook things like this. Over the last 12 years, black voters have moved 19 points away from Dems towards Republicans. Hispanics, 29 points, and Asians, 17 points. In fact, when we focus in on voters of color without a degree, generally referred to as the working class, the movement is astounding, 37 points. Okay, so what that means is that what we have in our country right now is we have a whole lot of people, definitely including rural white folks, but not limited to them, who don't trust. They don't trust the system, which they think is rigged. They don't trust politicians, and increasingly, unfortunately, don't trust their neighbors. That's one of the underlying reasons. Where did all this mistrust? Where did all of the grievance come from? Well, first of all, from economic insecurity, from 40 years of the bottom 80% of the population basically becoming increasingly uncertain and precarious about their economic future. That's especially true in communities of color and rural communities. And this list is the highlight list for Democratic betrayals. The truth is that the economic betrayal of rural America has been very bipartisan. The Republican list would be much longer, but we've got to own up to the fact that very big decisions were made by Democratic leaders, actively doing things like eliminating Glass-Steagall or signing into law some really bad trade deals, or passively letting the acceleration of corporate concentration continue. And that economic betrayal has become, over the last 4 decades, the foundation of this sense of being screwed, betrayed, neglected, and that is where this anti-elitism has emerged from. Now, tons of us on the progressive side also think the system is rigged, 100%. But what the right has managed to do is to persuade most rural people and many working class people that those elites that rig the system, yeah, they're the plutocrats, but they're also the liberals, the Democrats, the city folks, the intellectuals, the academics. Kathy Kramer, brilliant woman who wrote a book called The Politics of Resentment, based on 4 years of talking to people in 24 different rural communities in Wisconsin. And Kathy it was absolutely clear to her that racism was playing a role in this rising tide of resentment. She said, but we are failing to fully understand the perspective, she's talking about, of these rural people she spoke with, when we assume that racism is more fundamental than calculations of injustice. The way these folks describe the world to me, people like them in places like theirs were overlooked and disrespected. Farah Stockman, another tremendous thinker and writer, looked at the one element that we too often miss on the left, which is how highly valued work is by rural and working class people, like hard work, often physically hard work, and the preference for that work over being dependent on subsidies, on transfers, on what people would call handouts. Farah said too often that those who champion the working class, she's speaking of us, speak only of social safety nets, not the jobs that anchor a working person's identity. And what I've seen in so much of the resistance so far is kind of a tendency to continue this reflection. I'm going to skip over that and just say that at this point, one thing we have to realize is while there's quite a diversity of opinion within our base and our potential base on social and cultural issues, the reality is that among rural, socially conservative rurals, people, there's a very strong adherence to progressive economic views. They looked at, in this Democratic Democracy Fund study, voters who went for Obama in 08 and 12 and then for Trump in 2016, and that's what they found. They have relatively progressive economic views. So that's a tiny little bit, a little hint of where RUBI comes from in our analysis of how we got here. Okay, what do we do? What do we do in this moment? RUBI is launching a campaign to broaden the resistance. It has two kind of core elements, which I'll tease out in a moment. One is that in our demonstrations, in our empty chair town halls, in our protests, we also need to prioritize the way in which Trump and Musk have betrayed rural and working class people, the core constituency behind them. And we have to not only show how those folks are getting screwed too, but we have to put forward a positive, compelling vision that includes policy and it includes local action. It's essential that we're out there resisting, that we're fighting for the undocumented, that we're fighting for immigrants. It is critical that we're trying to stop the destruction of our democracy. But does our outrage routinely include what's happening to farmers? Because now is the time for us to make sure that's part of our protests, our signs, and our outrage. So RUBI has begun a social media campaign, and we're tweeting about these things. I guess you don't call it anymore. Anyway, we're posting about those things. One example is here on the left. The Trump administration has canceled the Farm to School program and the Farm to Food Bank program. Those not only helped kids and people in need, they provided a $1 billion market for small farmers raising healthy food. Been completely canceled. We need to be talking about that. What about the miners that have been hit by this? Trump talks about clean, beautiful coal. What bullshit. In the same breath, he's turning around proposing the closure of 35 mine safety health administration offices, the offices that help ensure that miners have at least a little less danger, a little less destruction of their health. What about prices? How often are we bringing up what has happened and the collusion of big companies like Cal-Maine Foods that are keeping the prices of eggs higher? When we, whether we're in protest mode or persuasion mode, when we tell people what they should believe and what they should care about, it just don't work. Big Dem consultants, some of the most influential and high-powered ones, tried that for all of 2024. I won't name names, but some of the most prominent consultants just would not talk about anything but the threat to democracy. Of course, all of us on this call knew it was real, but we also knew it wasn't working. Ultimately, 75% of swing voters that went for Trump said that Democrats were too focused on fighting Trump rather than bringing the country together. And among Black and Latino working class voters, speaking in focus groups to two different New York Times reporters, they said the election was about the cost of living, that Democrats' dire warnings about the threat to democracy were much less compelling. We know that speaking to their core concerns, the core concerns of everyday people, working folks, rural folks, does work. These are from the same rally that we saw in the video, the Montana rally. This woman on the left, Sarah Nelson's with the flight attendants unions, she's speaking at that rally in Missoula to workers' concerns and what's being done to workers. On the right, this gentleman in the white shirt is a member of the RUBI board, Bill Bronson from Montana, who was in the Montana legislature for years. He's standing next to a fellow legislator who was a Republican for many years in the Montana House, who has decided that people like him and working folks are getting screwed, and so he's switched over to the Democratic side. Now is the time to focus on those core issues. Now is the time for us on the progressive Democratic side to also talk policy. Many of us think, and Indivisible has kind of advised people, no, 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 we can't put forward policy now. We just have to fight the bad stuff. We just have to stop it. We don't agree. We think this is the ideal time for us as progressives to step forward and say, you know what? We have policies that we know work in rural, in working class communities, and we are going to put them front and center. Even if they won't pass, we're going to be talking about them all the time, like we do in the Rural New Deal that RUBI and progressive Democrats wrote. And now is also the time, yes, for all of us at the grassroots to be standing up, but also for the Democratic Party once and for all to recommit to the working class. Stare Calhoun signed this petition that we put forward. Many of you did, that asks the Democratic Party, that asks the DNC to give just 10% of the money raised, that would be about $400 billion, and start investing it from the bottom up in local county committees, especially in rural and working class communities, so we can start to rebuild, improve our understanding of these communities, and begin to win people back. I'm thrilled to say that because we got so many people behind the letter, I have a meeting next Wednesday with Ken Martin in DC. So we are going to try to get the Democratic Party to help lead. And lastly, now is the time to rebuild trust by rebuilding our communities. And some of you know of the Community Works program that we launched almost 2 years ago in Virginia and rural Georgia, where Democrats come together, but put aside the partisanship and the political and simply do stuff in the community, fixing things, helping people, picking up trash, launching blood drives, and they're doing it with their more conservative neighbors. It's working. It's one piece of the rebuilding trust. The fourth Wednesday night of every month, Meredith Dean, the director of Community Works for RUBI, hosts a gathering where you can learn about it. We're getting interest from all over the country. I'd encourage you to think about coming to the meeting next Wednesday night to learn about it, if that sounds interesting. That's it.
So
I'm going to stop. And
you did good. You did good, and I'm going to hope that you come to the after chat, because there
I
are
am coming.
there are the things that you talked about that we need to do. I am just in so much agreement in terms of speaking loudly about what the Republicans have not done for rural people. And it's just, I mean, it's the little things. It's post offices, it's cutting funding, it's all of those things, and yet they still believe. There is one thing though that I really feel that I must just, I'm not even pushing back, but I think that it's really big. And that is the notion that people of color and Black people are really big in terms of race and its implications. Because when I look at the data in terms of why people were so enamored with Trump, it wasn't because of his economic issues. It was because he made immigrants seem like monsters. It was because he made diversity seem like the thing that it shouldn't be. So I just think that when we talk about these things, that we do have to have an understanding that race, I believe, is far bigger than what you talked about here. I mean, if you just think, there's this fascinating book and it's called Everybody Lies. And it looks at Google and the kinds of things that people Googled in terms around race. And in those places, they found out that they were the reddest places. So though I am in absolutely agreement growing up in a rural place and still living in a rural place, I just want to say that there has to be some honesty around the fact that there is a lot of racism that exists. 55% of white women, for whatever reason, whether it's because of NAFTA or because of whatever, believe that Donald Trump was the answer to all of their questions. So I just think that we just have to be balanced in terms of where race is, and that we have to be honest about having conversations with people that maybe your race issue shouldn't be as important as the kind of quality of life that you can live.
100%, Fidel. I don't disagree with that at all. Let me just say two things about it. I don't know if you have read Heather McGhee's book, The Sum.
Yeah, The Sum of
Heather
Us.
McGhee was one of the founders of the race class narrative. Brilliant woman. She has this great quote that I'll paraphrase. She says, the plutocrats have always known that solidarity is the answer. She's talking about solidarity of us across geography, race, and class. And she said, and that's why they have worked so hard to curtail any empathy that white people who are struggling might have for people of color who are struggling, and vice versa. And the right has been masterful at that.
Yes.
Masterful at that. But my point is not that that hasn't happened, but to the extent that Democrats have not boldly jumped in and also met the challenges that struggling white people have had. We have not helped ourselves. We've exacerbated that difference. We've played into the rights narrative. And the second thing I want to say is, remember that when RUBI talks about reaching people, broadening our tent, bringing more people into the resistance, we ain't talking about everybody. There's a whole bunch, unfortunately, tens of millions of Americans that we're never going to get anywhere with.
Never going to get them.
And I'm not sure that we want to. But within those 74 million people who voted for Trump, there's a whole bunch of people who are winnable, because if they get the attention and the respect and the focus that they feel they've not had from us, bit by bit, we will peel them off of Trump and MAGA back to us.
I absolutely agree. I don't believe that in this coming election that race class narrative will be the thing that will get us to the right place. I think that that will have to go aside, and we have to your point, broaden how people think about this. But I also believe that in that there will be an honest conversation that race isn't the end all be all. It is about people understanding that we all rise together and being good with that. So this has been fantastic. So Catherine, I don't know where you want to, if you want to come back and talk to us a little bit about next week. Anthony is going to stay with us in the after chat so that we can have more discussion about this, because there are a lot of answers in RUBI's work. And I never want to dismiss that, because those are the things we must do. And I'm really eager to have more conversation with both he and Cory.
Sorry. No, it was really good. I have to say, you did good. I'm verklempt. So thank you, Anthony Flaccavento. I'll let you take it for now.
She's going to let me take it. So I think this has been an awesome discussion. I am not sure who, oh yes, I do. I know that next week we're going to have a fantastic discussion. We're going to have our national show next week, and we're going to have on the show next week, which I do not have in front of me, but it will be Susan Wagner. And we're going to be talking about how everybody can make a contribution and how we can bring small groups together. So that'll be a fantastic show. So with that,
I got it. I'm
you
back.
got it.
I had a little tickle.
You
So I
had a
want
little
to
tickle.
thank, yeah. And for the wrap up of our guests, thank you, Cory Amron. So great to get to meet you. Women Lawyers on Guard, Aaron Mukerjee, up there, Elias Group. And we got to stay in touch about the SAVE Act. And of course, Anthony Flaccavento from RUBI. And these are all great discussions. And I love the intersection of what it all means. Because when I really think about this back and forth, I think about just all the people suffering right now. And I think if we get real about it, from federal workers, from what we see happening to farmers, if you all read yesterday, all the funding cuts they had for rural America, it's right there. It's huge. Hospitals. I couldn't believe what they were doing to farmers. So
I was going to say, Catherine, it was $54 billion that was allocated for farmers, and 34 of it has not been allocated yet. So I just say that there's it's 54 million, and 36 million hasn't been allocated as of yet. And so will it be allocated? So it's going to be a lot.
And they're just, even all the workers are waking up. They're like, well, we're still sort of wondering if this will work for them or not with the tariffs. And so we got to make the injustice, as we always say, real, and put the spotlight and shine it.
Make injustice public.
So I want to say thank you, and thank you to our patrons. And next week, we'll have Hallie Lee, author of The Big We. And we have Celia Magnolia for the Bay Area Coalition about house parties, because it's going to be all about building community. And Brett Healy, 4 Directions, Native Communities, Advancing Equality in the Ballot Box Across Indian Country. So thank you guys for being here. I would love if we would be able to roll credits and get to the after chat, because we have a lot of stuff to do. Thank you to the team up there. We want to see you next week. Let's roll it.